But I will also follow up with you to make sure that we get you more information, more detailed information.
Is the FBI obtaining anonymous social media data and then using technical methods to pierce the anonymous nature of the data?
Anonymous social media data?
So you purchase data. People purchase data all the time, and we sort of tolerate it for advertisings and things because it's anonymous data. Are you purchasing what is said to be anonymous data through the marketplace and then piercing the anonymous nature to attach individual names to that data?
Right. But when you asked about anonymous data, I was thinking more in terms of
No, I'm talking about data that is out there, and are you purchasing data and then piercing the anonymous nature of that data?
So the manner in which we usually use the term commercial data is probably longer than I could explain here. But again, let me have a
So
one of our subject matter
you aren't
experts follow up
prepared,
with
you will not answer the question of whether or not you're attaching names to anonymous data.
I think it's a more complicated answer than I can give here.
So far, we're 0 for 2 with getting you to answer this, but you're pledging you will actually answer the question, because you have to realize the frustration. We'll write you a letter, and your team of lawyers will write back a 15-page letter that says nothing, and you won't answer the question. These are very specific. This is whether you're obeying the law, whether we can have confidence. I want to have confidence in the FBI.
We are obeying the law.
Well, you're saying that, but we won't tell us the answer.
I said
so.
we
So
would-
you have to
no,
say yes.
That's not what I
yes,
said.
No, you aren't telling me the answer, and the answer is: are you collecting data not compelled by a warrant? That would not be in compliance with the law, but you won't answer that you're not collecting that data.
I said two things. One, we're following the law, and second, that we would have somebody follow up with you with more detailed, specific
So those are two
information.
specific questions. Are you getting data from them that's not compelled? And then are you piercing the anonymous nature of that technically? Are you receiving private messages from social media companies through the use of confidential human sources? From Facebook, social media companies. You have people working over there who you're paying or who are volunteering to give you information, even though it would be against the law for Facebook to do this. But now you're saying, well, we'll get around the law by using confidential human sources.
You mean, just to be clear, I'm following the question, you mean, in effect, recruiting a human source inside the company?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I don't believe so. I think what we have had situations where we have confidential human sources, not employees of those companies, but who report to us on their own communication.
Okay.
So if the two of us had a communication and Secretary Mayorkas was a human source, he could report to us about what he is saying to me.
Once again, I'd like the answer to be more specific from your team. Not that I don't believe so, but that you are or are not using human confidential resources within Facebook. So we get back to the idea of whether or not you're getting information for them outside the warrant process, because the next question is, which you probably won't answer either, is, are you taking information that you're getting not through the warrant process and then going around and coming back and using that as a predicate for getting a warrant to actually get the information you've already been given?
I'm not sure I'm completely following the...
Basically, you get information that Facebook's volunteering. This has all been written up in the Post article. You're familiar with the Post article with the accusations. And the question is, are you getting information they're giving to you? They say, oh, somebody says January 6th was great. Here's information on this guy. Then you're taking it and then using it as a predicate to say, well, now let's go to the court and get a real warrant and get the information we already actually got without a warrant.
So we get tips and leads from all over the place, from members of the public, from businesses, from community leaders, from other and government partners all the time. And we use the tips and leads that we get to often form predicates for law.
Are you getting tips and leads from Facebook and social media companies?
We get tips and leads from companies, absolutely.
Right. It includes private information.
But I'm not aware of us receiving any tips or leads.
Because see, here's the point is, you may think it's just jolly well to get all this stuff without a warrant that people volunteer to you, but many of us are alarmed that you're getting this information that are private communications between people because it is against the law. It's against the law for Facebook or social media companies to give it to you, but it's also against the law for you to receive it. So you're going to have to very specifically go back with your team and search over whether you're doing it, not just say, we're probably not, we obey the law, we're good people. Well, no, there are doubts because this has been reported. Even the FBI, when you responded to the New York Post article said that companies are referring information to the FBI with investigative value relating to foreign malign influence. Now, there'd probably be a great deal more tolerance about that if it's foreign malign influence, but the question is, are you also receiving information on so-called domestic? But what would that mean? Is someone questioning whether paper ballots are an accurate way of running election? Is that good enough for you to be getting our private information because we have a political beef with the way votes are counted or recorded in our country? Is that something that you're collecting information on? Are they giving you information on private things that you've told them, well, people who question the election, we want to hear about these people, and so then they're giving you this information? Are you receiving information like
I'll give you two classic examples that I think happen with some frequency. One, if we supply information to, say, Facebook or any number of other technology companies about foreign accounts.
Response whatsoever or a non-response response. It's one of the reasons, and I'm very grateful to all the whistleblowers that are coming forward to various committees, to various members, people of integrity within your organizations, blowing the whistle on the corruption at some of the highest levels of the FBI. First question, do you commit publicly that the FBI will not retaliate against those whistleblowers?
Senator, we will not retaliate against whistleblowers. I take the protections that are in law and regulation of whistleblowers extremely seriously.
Good, we'll hold you to that. Okay,
just like
next.
I take compliance with all of our other rules very seriously.
Senator Grassley wrote you a letter on July 25th of 2020 in which he said that whistleblowers to his office reported that FBI officials initiated a scheme to downplay derogatory information on Hunter Biden for the purpose of shutting down investigatory activity related to his potential criminal exposure by labeling it, quote, disinformation. Boy, that's a familiar term. That scheme was hatched in August of 2020. Also included, he said, in August 2020, FBI supervisory intelligence analyst Brian Auten opened an assessment which was used by FBI headquarters team to improperly discredit negative Hunter Biden information as disinformation and cause investigative activity to cease. Have you responded to Senator Grassley's letter that he wrote over 3 months ago?
Senator, I know there have been a whole slew of letters. I believe we've responded to a number of them, but I'm sitting here right now. I can't tell you which ones we've responded to and which ones.
Have you looked into those charges that there was a scheme hatched in August 2020 to downplay the derogatory information on Hunter Biden? Have you looked into that personally?
We have, as we speak, a number of personnel matters that are underway, and for as reasons I'm sure you can appreciate, we can't discuss.
I know that's always your excuse.
Matters.
No, I got it. I understand how you remain above the law by using that excuse repeatedly. The reason I'm a little sensitive on August 2020 is that on August 6th, both Senator Grassley and I received an unsolicited briefing by members of the FBI, which I knew immediately was a setup. No new information whatsoever. I knew it was a setup, and I was correct because 9 months later, on May 1st, it was leaked to the Washington Post to smear me. I have written you publicly a number of times asking who directed that briefing. Are you prepared to tell me in public who directed that briefing now?
Senator, first off, I can't discuss specific defensive briefings more broadly, and that's a longstanding practice.
So tell me then, why have you refused to meet with us to privately tell us who directed that briefing?
So, if I may finish my answer to the question. It's longstanding practice not to discuss specific defensive briefings. We have, as my understanding, responded in writing to a letter that you sent. I think
it's just bureaucratic. It's bureaucratic gobbledygook is what that is. That's not a response.
We offered in that letter to provide a senior executive of the FBI to walk through in detail our process.
What your process is, but not specifically who directed a briefing that was used to smear me. Have you looked into the leaking of that briefing to the Washington Post? Have you investigated that?
I'm not going to discuss specific investigations. As to the briefing question and who directs it, let me be very clear about this. When it comes to election-related defensive briefings, There is not a single person who makes that decision. That is an interagency process that was set up by the prior administration, signed off on by the former president.
Well, there
chaired by the
are
Office of the Director
there are
of National
persons in
Intelligence.
that interagency, correct? So there would be persons. So we should know who those persons are. Why won't you tell us who directed that briefing? The persons then.
I would refer you to the process that was put in place, and we can give you more information about the process if you would like.
Have you read Senator Grassley's and my report on Hunter Biden's corruption issued in September of 2020 and November of 2020? Have you read those reports?
I have had a chance to look at it.
Do you see any sign of Russian disinformation in those reports?
That would be a hard question for me to answer.
No, it's very easy. It's very easy.
What I would say
It's a
to
very easy answer. There is no Russian disinformation. That report is completely clean of any interference of foreign influence, although we have been falsely accused, including by the chairman of this committee, of spreading Russian disinformation.
News outlet. Many in the FBI have been accused of bias. Some have been convicted. Some have been let go. McCabe, Klein Smith, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page. So it's kind of hard to argue that somehow we can get people in the FBI that are above bias. It seems to be something that goes with the territory. Maybe it was a bad spate of time where we had a whole bunch of them all at once, but it's a problem. When we investigate a presidential campaign, I think it's important that we realize the potential for bias that exists in the people bringing an investigation forward, but also incredibly important that we should devolve or at least consider using the Constitution and not using warrants that are used on foreigners. So we have two different standards. We have a constitutional standard, which is typically used for Americans, where we use the Fourth Amendment. And the Fourth Amendment says you have to have probable cause, of a crime. The FISA court standard is not a Fourth Amendment. It's an extra constitutional standard. It's less than the Constitution. It's probable cause of being associated with a foreign government. The problem is that when we have presidential candidates, they're all going to have foreign policy advisors. Most of them will have long-standing history in either government of some sort. They'll have people who do talk to foreigners all of the time. So you can see how someone with bias, and I think that's what happened during the investigation that turned out to be untrue on the Russia collusion. So we had a massive investigation of a presidential campaign. And I don't think enough of us have stepped back to say, well, my goodness, should we be using FISA warrants for the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court? Should we be using that kind of warrant on an American, particularly an American running for office who has all of these contacts? Do you think it's appropriate that we use FISA court warrants to investigate presidential campaigns?
What I do think is appropriate is that we use FISA warrants to investigate counterintelligence threats to the United States, as long as it's done consistent with the minimization and querying procedures that are carefully approved.
You don't think there was any problem with this investigation with the Crossfire Hurricane? You think it was all completely appropriate? Nobody in the chain of command was biased, and it just occurred because they were curious? We just indicted one of the Clinton lawyers yesterday for lying to you guys. You guys took it hook, line, and sinker and said, oh, well, we'll just investigate a major presidential candidate. Of course there's a huge problem. And if you don't see that there's a problem and that we need more controls on this and that we need to somehow obey the Constitution, I would say the same for President Biden. I would say the same for a president of any party. What a crazy upturned world where there would be, the bias is there. There's no way to get it. The reason we have checks and balances with the judiciary is so we can kind of get over the potential bias that occurs in the FBI or the CIA or anywhere else. If you don't have to go to a court and you go to a court that doesn't obey the Constitution, that's held in secret, that's not justice, and it's going to be rife for abuse. You don't agree with that?
There are parts of what you said that I'd like to weigh in on. So first, as to what happened in the so-called Crossfire Hurricane matter, I would say to you today, and I have said publicly on a number of occasions, that what that Inspector General report describes by certain FBI personnel, I consider to be unacceptable and unrepresentative of the FBI that I see every day, having joined in 2017, and not something that I think can ever happen again. So I want to make sure that you and I are talking,
Well,
not
I
past
think-
each other
I-
on
I
that. Now,
think that-
second, I've put in place over 40 corrective measures, everything the Inspector General has recommended, and then some, to make sure that what happened there does not happen again.
I think that's admirable, and I appreciate that point of view. But, you know, when Hamilton wrote that if men were angels, you know, we wouldn't need the Constitution, we still are relying on angels working at the FBI. We're relying on you saying we're going to get a better set of people. We're not going to have that bias anymore. I think that's admirable. That's what I would want in someone being the director. But what we need is something beyond that. And this is what our founding fathers did when they set up the Fourth Amendment, is we had a Constitution and we had the Fourth Amendment, an incredibly important amendment, and then we had a judicial system. The FISA court doesn't obey the Fourth Amendment. It has a less than constitutional standard. It allows you to have warrants without obeying the Fourth Amendment. And people don't realize this. You not obey the Fourth Amendment, you have a lower standard for going after foreigners. I'm actually okay with that. If you're not a U.S. citizen and you're investigating someone overseas and you're eavesdropping on them, I'm actually fine with the FISA standard. But I'm not fine with the FISA standard for Americans, particularly Americans who are running for office, particularly for the person running for the highest office who is interconnected with all kinds of countries and always will be. And once you get biased people, once there's not perfection, and we get biased people in the FBI, the problem is the system can be abused. I think the only fix, it's admirable to have some regulations and some checks and balances you put in place, but the only real fix would be we should obey the Constitution. I don't think Americans nor political candidates should be investigated using a foreign intelligence surveillance court.
Thank you, Senator, for your kind words about the corrective measures we've put in place. I would say to you that I believe the FISA court operates within the Constitution, so we might have a difference of opinion on how we characterize it. I would also say to you that as we sit here 20 years after 9/11, and as somebody who was in FBI headquarters on the day of those attacks and saw the immediate aftermath, as we started to reverse engineer what went wrong on 9/11, much has been discussed back in those years about the so-called wall that was built up between law enforcement and intelligence. And a lot of the reforms that have occurred, thanks to this Congress, thanks to the courts, thanks to the executive branch, to make sure that there is not a wall between the information sharing that has to occur, has been part of what's kept Americans safe since then. So I would want, of course, to work with you on any ideas that you have, but also to make sure that we don't rebuild the wall that made us all less safe and cost 3,000 innocent lives on the day of those attacks. Thank
I
you.
appreciate your opinion on the FISA court having the same standard as the Constitution. They don't. The Fourth Amendment